Hello everybody and welcome to another CS Lightwork video. Today I'm bringing you guys a Selenium Python tutorial. Now if you guys aren't familiar with Selenium, it's basically a browser automation tool which you can easily use to automate scraping data off the web or submitting forms, anything you want to do. I personally find it very interesting. The syntax is very simple to use using the built-in functions, and honestly, I find it really fun to build smaller to bigger projects with, and I wanted to bring you guys a basics tutorial showing you guys how to basically get and scrape data and input form submission, simple stuff like that. So before we get into it, I'll go through the installation process very quickly. So if you're running Python in your command prompt, you should just be able to type in pip install like every other package and type in Selenium. Now, of course, because I already have Selenium installed, when I run this, it's going to let me know all the requirements are already satisfied. But that is the first step you need to take. And after installing the Selenium package, what you need to do is, depending on your browser, of course today I'm going to be using Chrome, I will provide this link in the description, but all you need to do is download the proper WebDriver for Selenium. So for in this case, I'm on the Chrome WebDriver page, and all I have to do is go to my settings here, and then go to About Chrome and check my version, and then download the according WebDriver, and that's about it. Now, that's all for setting up Selenium in terms of the WebDriver, in terms of installing the packages. Now, let's get into some code. Alright, so now that you have Selenium installed through pip install and you have the WebDriver downloaded, let's get into some code. So before we begin into doing anything with Selenium, of course, we need to import it properly. So we're going to do from Selenium, after you have it installed, we're going to import the WebDriver. And this is important because this is what we're going to do to launch the browser to do whatever we want, whether that be web scraping or form submission, etc. So that's what we need. And what I'm also going to import here is something called by. So from the Selenium WebDriver, we're going to import something called by. And what by is, essentially, it's the way we're searching what we want to find. So on a page, if we're looking for an element and its ID is video title, for example, what we want to do is we would, after opening the browser, we would select search by and then ID or XPath or whatever you want to do. And of course, if this is sounding like gibberish to you, don't worry, it did to me too, but it'll be clear once we start getting into the code. So now that all that's out of the way, let's get into start writing stuff. So what we want to do is, first we want to open the browser, right? Whatever we're doing, whether we're scraping data, etc., we need to open the browser. So first what we need to do is we need to establish the path that you installed that driver on earlier. So the driver that you installed here, all you need to do is get the path for that. So what I'm gonna do here is declare the path right away. And then for me, that's GitHub Copilot going crazy over there. This is my path. So all I did was whichever folder it was in, I copy pasted the path from the top, as you can see. And then I just added in an extra slash between every directory. And now you have your path set up. Now what we want to do is set up a URL. So for this example, let's just use Google. Let's set the Google URL, and all we have to do is set it to HTTPS and then the URL to Google. Of course, simple as that. Now let's get into the fun stuff. Let's execute the path and open the browser automatically. So to do this, we need to declare the driver. We declared the location of the driver over here, but we didn't actually set the driver, the Chrome that's going to be executed. So what we're going to do here is declare driver.webdriver.chrome, and we're going to set it to, within the parameters, we're going to set it to executable path, which is essentially just saying the path that we're going to execute is equal to the path we declared up top. And again, if I'm going too fast or there's any doubts or confusions you have, feel free to rewind the video, slow it down, or leave any questions below. Now, of course, if you guys are just getting started with this, again, it's not too important that you understand exactly what's going on here, but just the general idea. And now finally, what we're going to do is open this path. So all we have to do is take our driver object over here, use the get method, and put in our URL. In this case, it is the Google URL. And now if we save this, I could just run it in our terminal. all we have to do is Python, and you can run this however you want. I just prefer to do it in the VS Code compiler, and we're just going to run it. And as you can see right there, you have a browser that's opened up and you have Google running. And this Chrome is being controlled by automated test software is how you know your Selenium is working and you've been able to open a browser. But now let's get into the real stuff. Alright, so now that you guys are familiar with the basics of opening up a browser and opening up a specific URL, let's get into some web scraping and actually displaying some data automatically fetched onto the terminal. Now, for this example, say you wanted to, I don't know, check the subscriber count of your favorite YouTuber. What we would need to do, of course, is what you might assume. First, we need to change the URL we're opening up into the channel URL of that YouTube channel you want to check. So, for example, say we wanted to do, I don't know, CS Lightwork. All we would have to do is open it up once and copy the URL and just paste it where that Google is. And then now we're going to be getting the YouTube URL instead of the Google URL. And as you can see, when I go to run this, you can see that the CS Lightwork opens up. And now, how do we get this subscriber count? Now, how we do this is pretty simple. Selenium, and why I love it so much, has a very simple method to find elements. In fact, it just is driver.findElements. Now, what do we use to find the element? Well, that's pretty simple as well. What we're doing is we're using the HTML for that element. So what does that mean? We wanted to get the subscriber count. So what we're going to do is we're just going to right click the subscriber count and look at that HTML element. So just got to make sure it's on the subscriber count. So let's just open that up again. And as you can see, we have the element right here with the user subscriber count. Now, the way that Selenium works is it has multiple different ways to fetch an element. We could do this by ID, by XPath, by CSS selector. But for the example I'm going to use here, I'm going to use the ID. Now, if we did want to go any of the other routes, all we would have to do is copy it and copy the full XPath, the selector, however which way you want to grab the element. But you're also able to do it with ID. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this ID. Now after, we can go back to our code and write the code to actually gather the data. So, as I mentioned before, Selenium makes this very, very easy because they have one built-in method. In fact, after version 4.3, if you guys are already familiar, Selenium removed the individual methods for each way to select an element and instead made it one method, find_element or elements. And in the parameters, there's the way you chose to get it and the actual name of the element. And I'll show you guys what that is so it's a little clearer. So we want to get the subscriber count. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare a variable subcount, and we're going to set that equal to driver, which is our Chrome driver, dot find element. And what this function is exactly what it says it is. It's finding the element. Now there are two parameters in this. One representing the way you chose to get it. So like I said, that could be ID, that could be XPath, however you want. And the second is the actual value of the element. So here, as we imported before, we're going to use the by keyword here and dot ID, because remember, we chose ID. We're going to use the ID to get the subscriber count. And now in the second field, I'm just going to copy in that ID. So as you can see, the sub count is set to what we can find from the driver based on the ID subscriber count. And that should be the user sub count. And what do we want to do after this? All we have to do is print out sub count dot text, because the return from the find element is not necessarily the string that's able to be printed out through Python. So we add that dot text to print it out on a terminal. And just a heads up, anytime you guys are getting this error, failed to read descriptor from node connection, this is actually an unrelated driver issue. As you can see on Stack Overflow here, it's just an issue with the Chrome driver. The code will work perfectly fine, as you'll see right now. So after we have all this written out, all we have to do is just simply run the code. And as you can see, it will open it up, get that element sub count, and if we go back to the terminal, as you can see, 13 subscribers. And now this doesn't just apply to subscriber count, right? It could be anything. You could be fetching the ID of anything or XPath of anything specifically. Now I'll show you guys how to add the XPath just now. So all you have to do is change this instead of by ID, as you'd expect, you do by XPath. And to get an element's XPath, all you have to do again is right click, click copy, copy the XPath, and you guessed it, paste it right into the value field right here. And then here we just need to make the single quotes because there's double quotes in the XPath. And now if we run it again, you should get the same output. As you can see, it's going to open it up, it's going to grab it, and if we look over here, 13 subscribers again. Now to close this browser after the program is run, it's also very, very simple. I'll just close the existing browser so you're able to see it close. All we have to do is driver.quit, and this will essentially, after printing out the subcount, it'll close the browser. So we could just run this very quickly, open, grab the subcount, not touching anything. As you can see, it'll close and print out that 13 subscribers. And essentially those are the basics of how you can grab any element from a web page that you've opened and print it out on your terminal, or do whatever you want with it. It doesn't have to be a YouTube subscriber count. It could be anything from a link. All you have to do is paste in that link to that web page and paste in the XPath of the element you want, the ID of the element you want, whichever works best for you. In this simple amount of code, I'm able to open a browser automatically and check whatever fields I want. And then if you want to manipulate the data, store the data, you could store it in an Excel sheet or however you'd like. But now that we've got the idea of scraping and gathering data, how do we automatically fill out forms and do inputs? Well, let's get into it. Alright, so now that we've been through how to open a browser and how to scrape data, now we're going to get into form submission and automation, whether it be logging into something, entering any input, submitting anything using Selenium. So let's get straight into it. Now, there are a lot of examples I can think of to use, but it's the same sort of syntax and functionality every time, regardless of what website you're, say, logging into or whatever form you're submitting. It's the same concept. You're finding the elements where the input is and you're inputting whatever you want. So I think the best example that I can use is an Instagram login. Now again, you don't have to apply this to just a login page. You could use the same functionality for a form submission. And all you would have to do is change the field names from, say, password or the XPath for the password on Instagram to the XPath of whatever you want to enter on your form. And the usage for this is endless. I have seen projects of people who auto book, who snipe things on Best Buy, who make bots to buy things online, to automatically register themselves for something really quickly. The possibilities are endless while maintaining the same functionality. So let's get into it. So for the URL, as we've seen before, we said we're going to do an Instagram login. So all we're going to have to do is, let's go on Instagram over here and just grab the URL. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to set this to Instagram URL, and I'll change this to Insta URL. Same thing when we open the driver. So now, as we said, we're going to construct a login automation. So I created a test Instagram user just for this purpose, so I don't leak any Instagram information. So what we're going to do here is, first, I want to declare what the input fields will be. Here, it's going to be username, password. But if you're doing something with a date of birth and email, you would simply just have more fields and enter them accordingly. But for Instagram, it just, and we'll look at the page, it just username, password, or whatever you want to use in the login, password, and press the button. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do username is equal to, and the user I created is Selenium input test. That's just the Instagram username. And the password for this, I set it to Selenium test pass. So that is the password, the login credentials for that Instagram user. So now let's get into it. We implement the same kind of functionality in terms of how does it know where to put in the inputs? Well, same thing. You want to grab the XPath of what's your input. So let's start with the username. We're going to grab the XPath of it. So now that we're on the element, right click, copy, and grab that entire XPath. So now that we have that, all we're going to do is we'll change the sub count. We'll set it to username entry, because this is where we're going to put in the username. And what we're going to do is keep this find element by XPath, but of course I'm going to change that XPath to what we just copied, as you can see here. And I'm just going to get rid of the print subcount because we don't need that. So now here is where there's something different. We have found the element where we're inputting it, right? But we actually have to input that username. We actually have to write it in. So the code for that is simply, you have to grab the element where you're entering it. So in this case, it's username entry. And the function is send keys. And that basically fills the input with whatever you put in the parameters. And in this case, that's going to be our username. And you guys sort of get where I'm going with this. Now we're going to do the same thing for password entry. So we're going to just set that to, I'll copy this over here, but we're going to change the XPath to whatever the XPath is for the password. So here I'm just going to go in, right click that. And as you can see, I have the element right here. Copy XPath. And again, you can do this by CSS selectors or ID if there is, as we saw earlier, but here I'm doing it by XPath. So now we have the XPath for the password. And again, same thing. Now we need to do password entry. This is GitHub Copilot going crazy again. We use the send keys function to input what we want to do in the into the automated browser. So what do we have to do after that? Well, once we have that username and password in the fields, we have to press login, right? So to do this, what I'm going to do is make sure I set it up as if the test credentials was entered. I'll just fill it with blank. And this is where we'll be after we put in the username and password. So now we have to do the same thing. Grab the path of that button. The same way we did username, we're just going to grab the path of that button. We're going to copy the XPath, and then we have to declare it just as such. So we'll say the login button is equal to, again, driver dot find element by XPath, and just make sure that you have the XPath copied in here. As simple as that. So what we're going to do here now is, now that we have that login button as an element, you have to remember this isn't doing anything other than fetching it. Selenium has a function where we can just do .click and boom, it clicks the login. As simple as that. Now again, this applies to anything, right? It doesn't have to be a login page. It can be a form submission. It can be whatever you want it to be. Now, what I'm going to add in here before we run this code, again, if I'm going too fast or you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the description, the comment section below. But I'm going to do one thing. What happens when we load up this Instagram page? It takes a little bit of time for that login to come in, right? We can't have the program search for the fields right away, or it's gonna not find it, right? Because we have that little waiting period where the Instagram logo is visible. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna put a bit of a delay. So how can we do this? We're gonna use time sleep. So essentially that just puts a little bit of a gap in between the following lines of code. So all we have to do for this is import time. And then after we open the browser, this is where we open the browser, I'm just going to do a bit of a 3-second sleep here. So what we do is we take our time library and put a sleep, passing 3 for 3 seconds, and let's save that. And I'm going to remove the quit so you guys can actually see it logging in without it closing the browser. And let's just run this code. Now let's watch as it opens up. So as you can see, Instagram's opening up. That 3 seconds. Username, password, boom, boom. Press the login button and we are in. Now, of course, this is a new blank account I just created, so it doesn't really have anything on it. But you guys could use this for quite literally any login you want to do, any form submission. As I mentioned before, if there's a form you constantly need to submit, I know during COVID times, a lot of people, when I was working part-time, there were these forms to fill out a COVID screening. Now, knowing that you passed the screening or knowing all the questions to anything, not just a screening, a form submission, what you could do is automate it, because the XPath, the input fields, will always be the same if you're doing it for the same website. So here I did for Instagram. You could do it for a form, a sign-up sheet, anything. If there's more fields, all you would have to do is create that new field. If there was email, all you'd have to do is, hey, let's add an email variable and then set it to whatever the email is, and then wherever we need to send the key. But guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys find this as interesting as I did, because I think it's really cool that with such simple code I can automatically run run a program to open my Instagram, and you can attach this with anything, right? If you wanted to log into your YouTube and check your specific stats, well, you guys already know how to get data, so you just need to log in like this and then use the previous functionality, find the element and print it back to your screen. There's a plethora of possibilities. I have a program on my GitHub, I believe it's called Web Scraper, that takes all my YouTube channel stats and prints it out, and I've even attached that to the Twilio API, and I get a text message with all my social media stats. So the possibilities are endless, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, if there's any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave it in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. The source code for this will be in the GitHub description, in Python tutorials. Thank you guys again. Like if you enjoyed the video, and I'm out.